Fortunately, he only needed a care and feeding guide for Hawk to complete the homework, which was a perfectly reasonable level of workload for the day. Plus, he had a cheat. "Hey, Hawk, what sort of things do you think would make you stronger? Something that you could eat or keep near you to grow extra fast?" Karl asked the happy bird, who had settled down in the space inside his mind to rest.
"I like meat and the red juice from the evil lady, and those blue fruits over there. Can I eat those?"
Hawk replied. "Give me a second while I see what they are and what they're for," Karl said before opening up the notebook for the balcony greenhouse. Mountain gooseberries. Tasty treats for both humans and animals. Used to make monster bait. This berry contains a high mana content, suitable for creating mana potions of the weakest variety. Karl read the description twice, and then went to pick 3 of the berries.
"You can have this many 1 time a day. If you eat too many, you will get sick,"
he warned Hawk. The hawk took the berries, looked at them with longing, then spread them all over the raw meat and began to tear it apart with renewed vigor. Karl added a note to the papers for his homework.
"Windspeed Hawks will use the mountain gooseberries as seasoning on their preferred raw meat diet."
Once the hawk had finished eating for a moment, and lay down to let the influx of mana and nutrients settle into its body, Karl started with the questions.
"Why do you call Sergeant Rita the evil woman?"
he asked.
"Every time I see her, she wants me to work, but there is never food. What else could she be except evil?"
Hawk replied.
"All right then. Where's the most comfortable spot to rest?"
Karl asked.
"Right here. Maybe the branches of that tea tree. Those ones smell good, and they hide your scent from prey. Tea trees are good trees,"
Hawk replied. All afternoon, Karl quizzed the bird and wrote out a report with the answers. Then he started to go through the textbooks, looking for supplements that might help monsters or even elites with rend-type skills. The first group didn't have much research on it, but the second one was pretty common. All sorts of warrior classes had a rending attack after a bit of training, and it was among the skill techniques that the Golden Divine Academy taught its warriors. Karl began to flip through the standard textbooks until he found the alchemy text. That one was more productive. Once they had the list of potential potions and treatments, Karl just had to check the ingredients to see if it was something that Hawk might like. Most of them were all herbal-based, but once he got to the strength potion, he found something promising. It was made from monster blood, infused with the dust of a gemstone that gave off strong magical energy. The two together gave the human imbiber a long-duration burst of energy. That stone was the promising part. He didn't really need something that would give Hawk a burst of strength. After that, Karl kept searching, but only found one other resource, a wind magic stone of the same sort. That one wasn't a natural resource. It was created by mages as a mana storage device. Hawk loved to absorb mana, and since it was air magic, Karl had some hopes that it would be able to work with that stone to improve its own abilities. That was 4 potential resources: high-energy monster meat with mountain gooseberries for seasoning, the infused blood, the strength stone, and the wind stones. If he could get all 4 of them, he might even be able to get Hawk through to awakened strength in the next few weeks. The next morning, Rita returned to collect Karl's homework before breakfast, and then came back with a small bag for their classwork.
"All right, I got you what I could to see if the resources actually help a pet beast grow faster than the average. This isn't going to be a short process. The Windspeed Hawk is going to need the whole semester to make it to awakened naturally. So, if you can do better than that, you should get good marks on your training. We will still work on your martial arts skills, though. If you get targeted by the opponents in a mock battle, you need to be able to defend yourself. And you do have at least one attack method of magical variety, she informed Karl with a smile. Well, at least I'm not expected to run and hide while someone beats up Hawk. What did you manage to find us? Rita dumped the contents of the bag on the table, and Hawk went crazy in Karl's mind. There were 2 strengthening stones, an entire liter of infused monster blood, and 6 blue wind stones that were giving off an incredible aura of power. The wind stones were made by the headmaster personally. He was part of the first batch of successfully injected elites, and he is now an overlord-grade mage. He says that if the windstones really can be a cultivation resource for the Windspeed Hawk, he will gladly make you more, and look into ways to awaken more elites in the same direction. Rita explained.
I take it back. Evil lady is actually nice lady.
Hawk screeched as it stared at the buffet in front of it. Karl ignored the bird's antics in his mind and placed one of the strength stones in a small dish full of monster blood. The energy seemed to seep from the stone to the soup Rita had also gotten, but Karl wasn't sure what to do with the wind stones.
You can't crush the wind stones, it will break the spell. But if he just sleeps beside them or wears one as a pendant, the mana should help, assuming he can use it anyhow. That's how the new air magic users do it.
Karl called Hawk out, and the bird immediately went to the soup and licked the entire bowl clean before turning its head to the wind stones. Each was no bigger than the diamond on a wedding ring, but the energy contained inside was immense. Sleeping next to them shouldn't be a problem, and Karl could even make a little pouch to carry them around Hawk's neck. But the bird immediately ate one, and swirling winds began to build around the balcony, tearing leaves from trees and nearly knocking over planters for the smaller varieties, before Karl pulled Hawk into his mental space.
What are you doing? He demanded of the tiny bird that was now radiating magical power.
It's food. Amazing, powerful food. What else would I do with it if not eat it?
Inside the space, winds whipped and power flowed constantly from Hawk to Karl, strengthening his body as if he were the magical beast. But from the outside, from Rita's perspective, everything was calm, and Karl was meditating or distracted by his thoughts, with no sign of external stimulus. All she could do was patiently wait until an hour later when Karl finally opened his eyes and gave an exhaust. The Windspeed Hawk appeared on the table, looking exactly as it always did, with cream feathers covered in mottled brown patterns that matched the common trees of the forest. But now it was much larger, as long as Karl's forearm, as a nearly full-grown Windspeed Hawk should be. It was also giving off the aura of an awakened grade monster.
It really worked. There actually is a way to cultivate tamed monsters. How do you feel? Is it a strain on your body?
Rita asked, ready to take notes for the academy.
I feel stronger, but I don't know how to check my mana levels. Is there a device for that?
Karl asked.
No, the mages know instinctively, but I'm not a mage. We can bring you to one later, and they can give us a reading for the records. But meanwhile, you can try to use your abilities and see how long it takes for you to get tired.
Karl ran off to the closet in his small room to get the gauntlets and came back out. A quick flex of his arms gave him a sense of great power, and once he got to the railing, he found that the resistance of the rend spell on his actions was negligible.
Impressive. That is definitely at the awakened rank in power. But how many times can you do it? If there is no stamina, the Academy will classify it as a common class burst ability on your part, where it is an awakened ability for the Hawk,
Rita explained.
Give me a few minutes to recover, and I think that I can do better.
A short break and a bit more to eat had Karl back up to full strength, while Rita quietly made notes about his recovery speed. Karl tried again at half strength, and the drain on his energy was negligible. The feedback from Hawk was enough that Karl felt he could do this for hours, but instead, he did it a dozen more times, alternating hands and directions of the cuts as if he was shadowboxing with Rend as the strikes.
15 minutes at half output. That's still common great strength, but on the strong side of it, and it looks like you are improving as the Hawk improves. Not bad for the first week, right? If you leave those resources here, I think that we can do better by the end of the month. We might even have enough strength to fight with some of the second-year students by the time the exams come around.
Rita laughed at Karl's enthusiasm.
You had better make time in your day for combat training then, or even with Hawk, you'll get beaten to a pulp.
She had a point. This whole beast taming thing would be a lot easier if he had a giant rhino or something scary in front of him, Karl thought. Hawk went straight for the windstones again, once nobody was paying attention, and grabbed another. But this time, it didn't integrate into his body in the same sudden rush. Instead, there was a steady flow of wind magic from the stone to the bird, and its body seemed to be adapting to the excess energy at a much slower rate.
Does it only work that well once? That was a pretty high-level resource compared to Hawk, so perhaps it damages the body when it is used in such an abrupt manner,
Rita suggested, while flipping her short black hair out of her eyes.
That's possible. I can't really tell, and Hawk doesn't understand either. He just wants the stones. I will ration them out for him, so he gets a new one when the old one is absorbed.
Karl agreed. That would be a while, as after he ate the second stone, Hawk was begging to be let back into the mental space to sleep off its overindulgence.
Food coma,
Karl explained, when Rita gave the disappearing bird a confused look. She sighed and shook her head.
That's not part of a proper training regimen, but today we can forgive it, since he had such a large breakthrough. I approve of your diet plan, and the infused blood will be brought to you regularly, along with a new strength stone in a few weeks. Hopefully, this one lasts, because that's as fast as we can get another. It looks like your abilities are very fast-growing, but equally resource-intensive. Perhaps if you grew naturally at the rate of the contracted beast, you could do it with only food resources. But from what we know of the wild magical beasts, they also need to eat some rare objects or absorb strange energies to reach the higher ranks naturally.
What Karl really needed was a way to improve the Hawk so it could beat other monsters at its level and not just keep growing. They were likely to have to face beast packs and invasions in the future, and one monster on their side against 10 on the other would mean very little to their chances of winning. Being able to work together was a nice start, but not enough to be considered a truly powerful sort of existence on its own. Hawk snorted in amusement in his mind.
What other Hawk of my level is so good with its magic or so majestic in flight? I know you're the best, but I'm trying to think of ways to make us even better,
Karl countered. Hawk went quiet as he thought about it. Hawks only needed one skill, the ability to kill their prey. But he supposed that more ways to food wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Maybe if he watched other birds do it, he could find ways to do it better? The Windspeed Hawk wasn't sure that was even possible, but it wanted to make Karl happy, so it was willing to try to use Rend in new ways.
Can we go down to the training areas? I think that the more we see actual combat while we're training, the easier it will be to come up with ways to make ourselves better,
Karl suggested. Hawk wasn't going to be coming out for a while, so he might as well train himself while he had the chance. Rita led him out of the dorms and out into the field on the opposite side from his balcony. There was a large training area there, with stone squares in the open field, and a large group of students were training unarmed combat techniques there. They were all second-year students and very good at what they were doing. But just watching them gave Karl ideas on how he and Hawk could work together to overcome them.
We're going to try something different today. Since you have a ranged skill of sorts, I want to start you on defensive basics. If you're fighting from a distance without magical armor skills like the mages learn, then you need to have a way to block. Today, we will practice blocking incoming attacks with your claws. The more you practice, the better you will get. Think of it like learning to play catch. Just hit the incoming attack with your own.
Somehow, that friendly description sounded extremely sinister to Karl, especially when she led him away from the unarmed combat field and toward a huge bunker.
There are mages at your level training here, stronger common class students that are close to breaking through to awakened. They might have a bit more stamina than you do, since they've been practicing longer. But it takes less to deflect the attacks than to form them. Now, at first, they will be firing down the training hall above your head. Don't worry. They shouldn't miss the target entirely at their level. Just do your best to deflect them off target.
Sergeant Rita explained. The mages nearby glared at Sergeant Rita as she said those words. Who was she to come in here and interfere with their training? They were already at the bottom of their class, but now she was bringing in some newbie hotshot just to mess with them?
All right, seniors, I apologize for the inconvenience.
Karl apologized as he felt the glares directed his way.
It is training for the mages as well. It's one thing to just hit a target, but in the real world, targets will defend themselves. Being able to work around the defense to land a solid hit is also a necessary skill,
Sergeant Rita added. In the end, she was a teacher, and they didn't have any say about her intentions for their training. But the thought that this was a real-world exercise, while they had been mostly abandoned to their own devices as the weakest of the elites, was somewhat reassuring. Sergeant Rita led Karl to the other end of the training grounds, where a dozen targets were lined up.
All right, everyone, here is the goal. You just need to land hits on the targets, the same as always. But this time, Karl here will be doing his best to deflect those shots and keep them from landing. With a dozen of you and one of him, it shouldn't be hard, but he needs the stamina training to help stabilize his foundation. Have fun, and don't be afraid to push yourselves to find new ways to get to the target.
They started casting as soon as she finished speaking, and Karl frantically began to cast rending blades at low output, letting them crash into the various spells. Some were deflected, some were only slowed, and some pushed through on their own with only a slight loss of power. It all depended on the element and the power of the spell as to what happened. Fire and water were the hardest to deflect. They just passed over with the loss of power, whereas ice, earth, and other solid objects could be easily knocked off course. The next time, he only used one rending claw per attack to save mana, but increased the power of each as he swatted aside and nullified the attacks. Karl panted with exertion and sighed. That was a mistake. The power needed was an exponential increase compared to the increased output. It was better to hit a target with multiple small attacks than one big attack. The mages were actually beginning to enjoy themselves, as they realized that he wasn't some wonder genius sent here to humiliate them, and that he was a newbie working on his mana control just like they had been all last year. With everyone limited in stamina and magical power, there were constant breaks, which also became part of the game that was played between Karl and the mages. He would sit down to recover, but still swat at attacks if someone got lazy, and an attack was particularly weak or slow-moving. In the eyes of the supervisor, the lone teacher assigned to watch over the dozen mages in this class, it was the best motivation that they had seen in months. None of these students were good at self-motivating, and their abilities weren't strong enough to get them a personal instructor, even one at the low level that Sergeant Rita had reached. To his trained gaze, the warrior with rending claws was likely to overtake her in power by the end of his first semester, while she had taken 3 years to make it to the middle of ascended rank combat power. Sergeant Rita was no genius when she had to learn magical powers,
but she was a great martial artist, and from what he could see, a superb teacher. Not only had she motivated her own student, she was motivating them as well. Karl and the others trained together until lunch, after which the mages would be moving to theoretical training to help them learn new spells, and Karl would be moving on to either close combat training or theory classes on how to care for a magical beast and research assignments on the chances of increasing its power more than its species would normally allow.
Come with us for lunch. It looks like you awakened a pretty cool combat ability right from the start with the ranged claw attacks. Most warriors are boring until they're at least reaching the end of the awakened rank, and they can start to hit targets more than 2 meters away from them.
One of the mages informed Karl. She was a tall and buxom blonde, but with the growth spurt that he had undergone the last few days, she was only a little taller than he is now, and Karl had hopes that he would reach an acceptable height before he had enough classes with others that his reputation as a shorty would precede him. At the very least, everyone seemed to respect his abilities, and thankfully, during the lunch, none of them seemed to notice that Karl covered an entire plate of raw meat in a drizzle of mana-infused monster blood, or that it simply vanished into thin air. They were all more eager to discuss the ways that they had thought of to use their spells to get around his defenses.
I think that if we can increase the speed and fire them as double balls instead of a single, we can at least get one through to the target. Better if you send them a few meters apart, so that the other claws don't hit. Or better at slightly different speeds, that will make it harder to guess when they will arrive.
Another mage sighed. His specialty was ice, and he had a terrible time getting the ice shards to hit the target when they were so easily knocked off course.
This is a different cafeteria than I'm used to. Where are we?
Karl asked.
Oh, this is the cafeteria in the Mage district. There is another in the warrior training as well, for students who were a long way from the dorm cafeteria at lunch. The foods at each are totally different because they are specialized for the different groups. The warrior one has more nutrition-based options designed to build muscle, while ours is more mana-rich. The one at the dorm is a mix of everything, but mostly it's used by the students who study in their dorms all morning, the non-combat elites.
That's good to know. I have to train every day, but today I definitely need the extra mana. I'm Karl, by the way.
Molly,
The blonde explained.
Formerly known as Gertrude Dingwall,
One of the boys teased.
but now I'm Molly. It's on my ID card.
The blonde replied in an annoyed tone.
You don't have to put your real name on the sheet, you see. She asked if she could change it when she was on the train, and the guard said they'd call her anything she wrote there. Legend has it that some prankster a few years ago was known as Tater Salad for an entire year before he could get his card changed.
One of the other mages informed Karl with a giggle. Hawk sighed in contentment as he feasted on the upgraded lunch package, courtesy of the red sauce that the not-so-evil lady had left for him, and Karl sat and joked with the mages for an hour before Sergeant Rita came to inform him of his next training task.
We will see you all tomorrow morning. But for the afternoon, Karl has actual combat training to do. He might have a ranged attack magic, but the Academy has determined that he is still a warrior class.
The mages made praying motions, wishing Karl the best of luck on surviving warrior training as well as ranged casting practice in a single day, then slowly made their way to theory classes with a renewed motivation to learn new spells that would get past his defense. Karl had been getting better all morning, but they all had thoughts on how to evade his defensive abilities. As they walked out across the grounds, Sergeant Rita smiled at Karl's concerned look.
Relax, it won't be so bad. We're going to the first-year unarmed combat classes. It's just basic martial arts, and most of them have very little skill. Your physique is miles beyond most of the other newbies, so you shouldn't have too many problems adapting. Plus, I brought you one more resource that I scooped from the Mage class instructor.
It's a memory drop, a condensed focusing spell that makes it easier to memorize things. It's not powerful magic, but it's incredible for studying. The mages get them as a reward when they do well on tests.
With this, Karl relaxed a bit. Just as Rita and Karl entered the class, the small but muscular instructor in his late 40s asked them, "Ah, Rita, welcome. It's good to see you back here as a teacher instead of a student. Who is this that you brought with you?" Chances were he wasn't part of the elite. He was too old to have been chosen even a decade ago. But if he was a martial arts expert, he would be the perfect person to be training new recruits. They wouldn't be stronger than he was, and they knew basically nothing, unless they happened to have some special training at home, with the hope that they would be in the lucky 5% that managed to gain an affinity to mana from the injection. That was a fairly big risk to take, but some would surely have done it just in case.
This is Karl. He's an agility-type fighter with a ranged magical attack that utilizes the claws on the gauntlets. It has proven quite versatile, and since it's a gauntlet-type weapon, he should fit in fairly well in your unarmed combat classes as well.
Rita explained. "Well, that sounds like it's a properly versatile skill set. All right, let's see what you can already do, and what you still need to learn." The instructor agreed. Karl laughed and Rita smirked. They both knew that he knew nothing, but with the enhancement that he had been getting from Hawk, at least he might not embarrass himself. The instructor noticed his uneasy look and smiled. "Don't worry too much. It's unarmed combat. Just leave your gauntlets over there and we can spar a little. If you're a complete newbie, just do what feels right, and that will tell me what way is best to help you develop."
Yeah, swoop down from above and break his neck.
Hawk added.
Not helpful. I can't fly.
Karl thought back.
Then jump or something, I don't know.
Hawk pouted.
Wait, that's not the end. You've just had a free taste. Now get the full story on the Pocket FM app, link in description. Check out our next video and playlist, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.